Hey guys, Navinata, No Limit Hold'em. I'm going to go back to kind of a basic concept, but this is something I think that, it's interesting to me that the modern day, like, kind of new students, like people that have been playing a long time or a decent amount of time, a few years, but have only just started taking the game seriously, are learning things in a different order than we would have learned things. I've coached guys that know a decent bit about like Nash equilibrium, game theory optimal ideas, but they don't know how to solve like an EV equation. So they can set up an indifference equation, maybe solve it, but don't really understand that the idea of all that, that the reason that we want to build our ranges in such a way in the first place is to get our opponent to make more fundamental theorem of poker mistakes than we do. So going to some kind of like some of the basics, I think a lot of players will know a good bit about poker, have watched a lot of my videos, other people's content. Maybe they get coaching, but maybe coaches don't think to go over this kind of basic stuff with them. So I'm going to do the first part of this as a quiz, or like a mini quiz. So okay guys, you've got your GTO stuff kind of figured out, or you know what well, not figured out, but you know what it is, and you're on your way to learning to solve Nash equilibrium. But do you know how to answer these questions? Like, which hand is better against King King? Now, uh, I was actually going to make a couple versions of the same question, but instead of doing that, I left this kind of ambiguous, but I don't think I'm going to go with the trick question element of this. Instead, let's just say um, if we are just talking like we're all in pre-flop, just pure equity, which has the most like built-in or raw equity or equity versus king-king? Would it be ace-3 suited, pocket queens, or 8-7 suited? Because if I just said which is better against king-king, the right answer should be better at what? And that's something that I try to drill into my students' heads. Like, when we're talking about one hand being better than another, we need to know what we're really talking about. Better at this exact stage, more likely to win if all the money goes in pre-flop, going to lose less and win more against a certain player that holds that exact hand in a given situation, where stack depths and position and all of those things can factor in. But just in raw equity, which one of these hands is best against king-king? So you're all in, pre-flop, which hand do you want? Ace-3 suited, pocket queens, or 8-7 suited? Number 2, how much equity does pocket fours have against ace-king? When I say ace-king, without saying ace-king suited or offsuit, I mean if we have opponents, or well, an opponent who has a range of exactly ace-king, so that includes all of the ace-king offsuit and ace-king suited combos, and we have all of the pocket four combos. What is our equity? Is it going to be over 50%? Do pocket fours have more than 50% equity against ace-king? B, is it going to be in the 46, 47% like ballpark? Like about, yeah, is it going to be basically a top-heavy coin flip in favor of ace-king? Or do we think it'll have less than 45%? So will pocket fours have more than 50%, less than 45%, or somewhere like in this middle ground here? 3, what hand is the better of the 3 in terms of equity? Again, like just ace-king versus which of these hands is best. And actually, you should be able to rank these in order. Or, well, you should be able to at least tell me what the worst is pretty easily. And then I'd be interested to know what people think about the other ones. Do we have any idea how we'd even go about trying to figure this out? Hopefully by the end of this video, you will know how to figure this out. Also, before I release the answers, I was going to do that at the end of the video, but I think this video is going to go on too long as is. So put in the comments section, put your answers in, and then maybe that'll spark some discussion and conversation, and then I'll kind of like grade them. I don't want them sent to my email. I miss way too much of that. Um, it's come to my attention. Um, and also, like going back to my last couple of videos, I'd really like there to be more comments in the comments section. That's what it's there for, kids, and I answer almost every single one. And the last one, which two matchups are the closest in terms of equity? So which of these pairs are these sets, like not pairs but strategy pairs, is going to be the closest in equity, raw equity, all in race equity. Pocket aces versus kings compared to queens versus queen jack, is that pretty close? Is ace king versus jack 10 pretty close to jack 10 versus pocket fours? Or is ace 2 versus king king comparable to ace queen versus king king? Like, does this look like how bad a shape are you if you have ace 2? How bad a shape are you in versus king king? Again, this is all suited and offsuit combos. I give you, just put it into Aqualab or something, or Flopzilla or PokerStove, whatever. So are you way more in way more trouble here against this hand than you are with this hand against this hand? Is it pretty close? Is it flipped? And the same thing here, like, is ace king versus jack 10 pretty close to jack 10 versus pocket fours? Ace ace versus king king and queen queen versus queen jack, are these pretty much the same situation? Two of these are almost identically the same situation. Which two are they? Like either A, B, or C. So here we go. So before we get into figuring out what the raw equity of one hand versus another, even before we even know or put any work into figuring out what the answer is it useful to know what the answer is? I mean, you're never going to know exactly what hand your opponent has. So does it even matter? And I would say, yeah, in a word, yes. Or in a word, hells to the fuck yes. For pre-flop shoves and knowing how to construct your ranges when you're relatively shallow, this is really important. If you're going to try to add another hand or two, and you have your opponent's range, some idea of what they're like 4-bet jamming at 70 bigs, it's probably pretty important to know how to figure this stuff out. It's good for even thinking about, like, well, if my opponent just jams on me, what if he has these hands? How does my hand stack up against this pretty tight range of hands? And also just working this stuff out, working with it, it helps you to get your head around why some hands make money and others don't, and in what situations some hands are better than others. Trust me, this is good information to know, and also just the process that you go through in figuring it out is a very poker-esque process. Like, this is how we think about poker. Poker lines up into non-linear hierarchies, and there's big huge groups, and then there's subgroups within groups, and then each little subgroup can be modified by this or that characteristic. This is how poker players think. So this is a good way to, and plus it's embarrassing if somebody asks you, like, how much equity does Queen Jack have over or against Ace King? It's like, I don't know, especially if you ever want to coach. I've been in that spot. I hate it. I've been wrong about that a lot, so let's not be anymore. Okay, so this is what I think is really interesting, is you can pretty much figure out how to do any problem. Like, a problem being like, if somebody came up to you today and asked you, do you think if I asked you, or if I just ask you right now, I'm going to give you, we're going to make $1,000 bet. And the bet is this. I'm going to give you two hands, two starting hands. Could be any two starting hands. No limit hold'em. So any two card hands. Can you tell me how often each one of them will win at showdown if all the money goes in before the flop? Would you bet me $1,000 that you'd be within 4%? No matter what combos I chose, because I would definitely take that bet. And I think by the end of this video, if you're not able to take that bet, you'll at least know that it won't take you much studying to fill in the little gaps that might be missing. And you might just take the bet, because I think you'd have a real good chance after you're done watching this video that your opponent gives you a question that you actually can answer and be within 4%. There's only 7 matchups. There's minor variations within them. And really, these matchups can even be combined. So you could end up looking at it, there's different ways to look at it. Like, what does it mean to be dominated? Well, in this, the way I'm using it here is like exactly ace king versus king queen. But could it also make sense to talk about domination in other ways? And my students know that I do actually think of domination in regards to other things. But these are the only 7 categories you'll ever have to memorize, and then you pretty much know how to figure out the equity of one hand versus another in just an all-in pre-flop like matchup. Like just an all-in, like we're gonna shove pre-flop, run the cards out, or put it into Equilab. What answer is gonna spit out of Equilab when you put in ace 2 versus pocket kings? Well, it's one of these 7 things, right? So if you know these 7 things, that's pretty much all you need to know, and you'll be able to get within 4%. Now, there's other things like how connected are the underdog cards, and we'll get to that. The basic matchups are underpair versus overcards versus undercards, over and under versus pairs, okay. So on. But an underpair would be like pocket 5s against overcards like king queen. So in this matchup, the underpair has 53% and the overcards have 47%. Roughly. Now, it does depend on some factors that we're going to get into, but it's going to be within 4% of this. Like, you're not going to have more than 57%. You're not going to have less than 49% when you have the underpair. Actually, that one's close, but you can be almost. Yeah, actually, let's see. Trying to think if that's it. I think I'm right. Maybe there is something that's like 48.5%. That might be possible, but you'll be close. And the end of this video is going to address how to make those little like teeny tiny adjustments. But basically, underpair versus overcards is a flip, but it's a lopsided flip in favor of the underpair. The overcards versus the undercards. So like ace king versus queen jack. It's about 60-40. Now really it's closer to, normally it's going to be closer to like 38%, 62% in favor of the overcards. But we can just kind of look at this as a flip and look at this as, one player's got the best hand, the other player has 2 live cards. And over and under versus a pair. So this is still kind of a domination situation. What is it that makes a hand like ace-king dominate a hand like ace-queen? Well, it's the fact that ace-queen can pair the ace and still lose. So effectively, by having your opponent dominated, if you share the ace, you've converted his hand into a 1-card hand. He can only hope to beat you when exactly this happens, when exactly he hits his pair and you don't hit yours. So like if you both hit the ace, like you have ace king, your opponent has ace queen. If the ace comes and you both hit your top card, then you win. If we both hit our bottom cards, then we win still. And it's only when villain hits his queen and we exactly don't hit our king that causes us to win. And that's the same thing that happens when you've got an over and under versus a pair, like ace 10 versus pocket kings. If he hits the jack, you still win. If so basically you're causing him to play again like with only 1 card. He's got to hit exactly the ace, and that puts you in about a 70-30 situation. Now it can be probably more like 65% to 75%, depending on exactly what we're calling domination and the suitedness, the connectivity. But again, we're going to get into that at the end. But roughly speaking, over and under, you can just look at it as you're dominated. If you've got the, if you've got the over and under, and your opponent has a pair that splits your 2 cards, you're roughly dominated. Like in heads up, if you raise pocket 7s and I 3-bet ace 6 and you call, I'm kind of dominated. You know, you can definitely look at it that way. Because even if I hit my 6, or, you know, let's use a better example. Let's say that, I mean, that still is a decent example, but one where there'll be real reverse implied odds to worry about. What if one player has pocket jacks and the other player has ace 9? Okay, so if the flop comes 9 high, the player that has the ace 9 has hit his 9, but he's still in a world of hurt because he still has the second best hand. And that's like the same kind of thing that happens when you have king queen and your opponent has king jack. If you both hit the king, your opponent hit the king, but he's still in a world of hurt. So this is, you know, you may as well just call that domination. It's effectively the same thing. Pair versus over pair, or like a pair over pair situation. If you've got aces, your opponent has queens. It's about 80-20, about 4-1. And again, you're in that domination range where you're pretty screwed. Being dominated sucks. Pair versus undercards, you're still dominated, and it's actually not. You know, having pair versus pair, it's like you think, well, you know, at least I can hit a set. But taking away all the straight draws and all the potential flush draws and all the, I mean, you're in pretty bad shape when you have to hit a set to win. I mean, even if you have 5 cards to do it, you're about a 4-1 dog, which puts you in that, you know, 75 to 80% domination, or 70 to 80% domination ballpark. So pair versus another pair, it's going to be 4-1. So these are like almost, you know, this is close to even money. This is like 3-2, a little worse than that, like 2.5 to 1, or no, a little worse than 3-2. Like, what is that? 3.5 to 2, 3.25 to 2. Anyway, 4-1, 4-1, lopsided flip, like 1 and a bit to 1. But 2 high cards, or let's see, where are we? High and low versus 2 middle. Oh, okay, so high and low versus 2 middle cards. So what's the favorite, ace 2 or king jack? Ace 2 is. What's the better hand? Well, better at what? You see what I mean? If all the money goes in pre-flop, ace 2 offsuit is better than king jack or king 10 or king 9 or king queen, because it's got ace high. So if nobody improves, the ace high wins. If both players improve, then most likely the ace high wins. It's only when the king queen improves and the ace high doesn't, or they both improve but the ace high only improves by pairing the bottom card, something like that, roughly speaking. So again, you're in this like 56-44 lopsided flip, 2 live cards type hand. Dominated hands like ace-king versus ace-queen, or king-king versus ace-king. And again, I think it's fair to just group these into the same category. But more standard domination is going to be like 70-30 dominated. But look, over and under versus pair, and dominated hands like ace-king versus ace-queen, or even pocket kings versus ace-king, puts you in roughly the same 70-30 dominated situation. Over pair versus under cards. This is what we refer to technically as being dog-balled. You are effed. This is about as bad as it gets. Pretty much this is as bad as it gets in No Limit Hold'em. Is when your opponent has aces and you have like 2 not paired cards that are both worse than, like, you can't even hit one of your cards and pull ahead. Something weird has to happen for you to win. This is like aces versus 8-7. Or like pocket kings versus 9-2. Or where you're pretty much in rough shape. You're going to be something in the neighborhood of 4-1 to 5-1. Excuse me. Now, these aren't all exactly the same situation, which I've alluded to already. there are things that independently will make small differences. And if you add enough of them together, it can actually make a pretty big difference. Like the example I'm using here, ace king versus pocket twos. Pocket twos is ahead. Well, we already looked at that. We have a pair versus two overcards. But ace king, of course, is two overcards versus two undercards. Ace king is a favorite against 9-8 suited. But 9-8 suited is actually a slight favorite against pocket twos. Well, didn't we just say that that wasn't the case? Well, we said it wasn't the case, but those were close, and there's modifiers, and they're all coming into play here. So what are the modifiers? So suited hands are going to shift the equity differential between the two hands by about 2%. But when you're already looking at, 46 to 54, that 2% alone gets you in the, and it's 2% like across the differential. It's not adding 2% from one and taking it away from the other. It's like a total of 2%. That actually depends on also whether or not your opponent has the same suit as you, but that's covered in one of these other concepts. So we've got suitedness adds a little bit of equity to the underdog hand. When two cards are connected, like 9-8, or they're separated by less than 4 spaces, like 4 spaces or less separate them, then they can make a straight. And the less the less separation there is between the two cards, the more straights they can hit. Just the more spaces in between the two cards, the less exact runouts are going to give you a straight. And this can add like 1 or 2% to the equity of the hand that's behind. And it does depend, like it's not a big deal if it's like 7-4, but like 7-4 versus pocket fives, the 7 and the 4 don't make enough straights to make much difference. But that's also got something to do with this third modifier, which is interference. Like you can look at this, I think looking at the modifiers is easier to look at and figure out and suss out and memorize if you actually look at the likelihood of the worst hand improving to be the best hand, and always look at it through that lens. It's more relevant because like when you're a big dog in a hand, then if you have all of these things going for you instead of all of them not going for you, that can make the difference between like, well, for instance, if your opponent has pocket aces and you've got 2 undercards, then even though you're not going to win that often, and even though you're not going to make that many straights, you're not going to make that many flushes, no matter what hand you have, the less often you're going to win overall, the more it matters to be able to make those flushes and straights. Because like if you're only going to win 20% of the time, and 5% of those times come from the fact that you're suited, they're not, you're connected, their cards are not, your cards are in the middle, theirs are either at the top or the bottom. Like aces don't have any cards to make well, kings would actually have been a better example because aces can make the wheel, but pocket kings can only make straights in one direction. But 8-7 can make straights in both directions. So like when you have a couple of cards that are a dog in a hand, like say you have 2 connectors and your opponent has a pair, if you have 8-7 suited, you would rather that your opponent had pocket kings than your opponent had pocket 9s because of interference. Like his 9s are going to interfere with the straights you can make, and you don't want him to have your suit. So if like if you had to choose between, if you have 9s, say 9-8 suited, and you have to choose between, let's say you have 9-8 of hearts, and you have to choose between your opponent having the ace of hearts and the ace of clubs, or your opponent having the ace of spades and the ace of clubs. You have 9-8 suited in hearts. If you could choose between your opponent having the 2 black aces or the 2 red 9s, you'd much rather him have the 2 black aces because of this interference. And the other thing which we've all already kind of touched on is the high, medium, or low in the overall 13 rank scale of things that you are. Like, if you're trying to make a straight, if that's going to account for a big percent of your already low chance of winning, you're going to make more straights when you have hand that has cards that are closer to the middle. That's when you make the most possible straights. Like pocket kings does not make as many straights as pocket sevens, for instance, or like king queen, or 5-4, or 4-3, or 3-2, or queen j. You know, the ones that are closer to the poles, the highest and the lowest, don't make as many straights as the ones that are in the middle. So that's what I mean here. So these are things that, you know, when you have this example we looked at, like pocket 2s versus 8-7 suited, 8-7 can be a favorite because they were already close, like overcards versus pair. It's already close, like it's almost a flip, you know, it's just a top heavy flip in favor of a pair usually. But once our hand is suited, like the overcard hand is suited, and the overcard hands are in no way interfered with. Like the pocket 2s do not mess up any of our straights. They don't mess up any of our flushes if it's like the black 2s and the 8-7 of spade, 8-7 of diamonds. So they don't interfere with us. We're suited, we're connected, and we're in the middle. So all of those things are enough to just barely make us a favorite. And it ends up being something like 51% instead of like 46% by catching a equity differential boost here, 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 and here. It makes like a 5% swing, something like that. Okay, so another example, we have king queen versus 9-9. So 2 overcards versus a pair. King queen versus 9-9 is a pretty standard overcard versus pair situation, and it's going to be pretty close to your like 46%. But ace king versus 8-8 is slightly different because the ace king bumps up against the top of the deck, so it can make fewer straights. But I was going to show this in Equilab and work it all out, but I don't want to spend that much time here. So in conclusion, we can get a pretty good grip on hand versus hand equity just by understanding a few categories. And it is useful to understand these. Now there's exceptions, but we can understand them too. And understanding and working our way through these things is not just going to help us in these specific situations, but it's going to help us to understand the way that poker works. And that, guys, I mean, that's not nothing, you know, that's kind of a real thing. So until next time, may all your outs be live and all of your pots be, that's not my thing, is it? What is it? Good quote, no. Oh, that's right, namaste, bitch.